The Italian Radio Hour is sponsored by Istituto Mondo Italiano.
Mozilo matado, gattado e
Buonasera a tutti. Good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Stefano.
E io sono Viviana. Ciao Stefano, come stai stasera?
Non c'è male, non c'è male. Tu come stai?
Benissimo, benissimo.
All right, we're here for another episode, and again, we'd like to welcome back our regular listeners, and also we want to welcome any new listeners, as well as our listeners online at khbradio.com. And as always, be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at The Italian Radio Hour.
E benvenuti ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo. Grazie per essere con noi anche oggi, mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana.
All right. Okay, folks. Obviously, if you were listening last week, you heard us kind of talk with Tony and from Radio up in Cleveland and Anthony from Alabuara. And also a reminder, if you haven't gotten your tickets yet, they'll be here in March. So go out and check out Istituto Mondo Italiano for your tickets to the Alabuara premiere concert. It's the intro song, if you want to at least kind of get an idea of who they are. And again, I encourage you to go out there and listen to it. But if you want to learn more, go out to istitutomondoitaliano.org. But as always, the most important thing that most people actually tune in here is for our phrase, as I jokingly say, that pays. So I think we were asked about essere al verde. Cosa significa, Viviana?
Well, if you were to translate it, to be in the green would not make any sense to most people because people associate red, to be in the red, as the expression not to have any money. Sometimes even your gas tank in the car, in the indicator. But actually, essere al verde is an old expression that comes from Florence, when they used to have public auctions, and they used to have this candle where the bottom was painted green, and when the candle would reach that green level, the auction would be closed. So la candela rimaneva al verde, which means time is up. A little bit like our expression, the Big Ben ha detto stop.
Very simple, very simple.
So, but today is used in colloquial Italian to say that you're just flat broke.
All right. And believe it or not, we had a lot of people reply to that, but I want to give a shout out to Tim, who actually was the first that got it correct. So
yes.
Thank you, Tim, for sending in your email. And again, we do enjoy reading those emails, so please continue to send in your emails, whether it's to answer the phrase or to give us some feedback you're interested in sponsoring. But again, keep the emails coming. We love it.
Okay, so before we continue with our show tonight, a little bit of pubblicità. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org. Okay, so I think we are welcome back to our listeners and the guest that we have on the line with us. We have been waiting for her for over a month when we had our conversation with Sampari. We're already talking a little bit about Calabria and the name of the book, Calabria, the other Italy had already come out. So I'm very honored to introduce Karen Haidt with us. She's an award-winning author for her book Calabria, the Other Italy, and also Basilicata, Authentic Italy. She's a fluent Italian speaker, and she has spent many years in southern Italy getting to know the people, their land, and their culture. Buonasera, Karen. Are you with us?
Buonasera. Sì. Grazie per avermi invitato al vostro programma.
Ci mancherebbe. Benvenuta,
sì.
Benvenuta.
Grazie, sono molto contenta di essere con voi per parlare della Calabria e anche la Basilicata. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. So some people might actually wonder, how does Karen Haidt, with this maybe Germanic name, have a connection to Italy? But actually, we will talk about it. You will tell us. I think your father and I share something. So I believe he and I share our alma mater. So I believe your appreciation for the Italian culture comes from your parents. Can you tell us a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. That's something I didn't know about you. So I imagine that you went to La Sapienza.
Esatto.
Yes. And as did my father in the 1950s. And so my parents lived in Italy As you say, they did not have Italian background, although I haven't done a DNA test, so who knows what's really lurking there. But they lived in Italy for 5 years and developed a love for the culture. They both spoke Italian fluently, although they didn't speak it with us, but it was sort of amazing. Every once in a while, we'd have an Italian guest, and they would be speaking this foreign language. And so we always had this love of Italy in our house. And later on in life, I decided to study the Italian language, and so from there it developed, and I ended up in Calabria teaching Italian. Yeah, that was funny. Teaching English.
They do have a different
obviously.
dialect.
And I saw that there wasn't much written about the region, and the book came out of it. So that's sort of in a nutshell.
Okay, so let's backtrack a little bit about some of the Italian family traditions that you might have cultivated in your household that were representative of that experience that your parents had in Italy. I don't know, any holidays or any foods?
Definitely the food. Definitely the food. We ate definitely more pasta than sauerkraut, that's for sure. In fact, I never ate sauerkraut at home. Yes, lots of pasta, lots of good Italian food. And for example, we had a nativity scene, a Neapolitan nativity scene, yes. And so, and they had friends who would come to visit. My parents would go back and visit them. So we definitely we felt the Italian presence. And also, growing up in New Jersey, which I just read recently, I think there was 17% Italian.
It is indeed a significant percentage.
Now, Karen, let me ask you, because you said your family lived in Italy. Your parents lived there for about 5 years. What part of Italy did they live in? You said
Rome.
Was it Rome? Okay, because
Rome, yes, because he was at La Sapienza, the university there, and he used to just say University of Rome, and it wasn't until later on that I realized it. In Italian, in Italy, they say La Sapienza.
La Sapienza.
I was curious because then again, we're going to get into the kind of the pool to Calabria here in a little bit, but I guess the question is kind of saying this jokingly, when you went down to Calabria, you said, I didn't teach Italian. I'm curious, when you learned Italian, you probably learned the regular dialect that most Italians speak. So, I want to just kind of dig a little bit more on your language. When you were studying Italian and you went to southern Italy, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. First I did at home. I did a lot of books and tapes. That was back, when you did tapes, and now I hear people talking about apps. But I did a lot of books and a lot of listening, and then I went to intensive language schools. I studied for a month at a time, sometimes a couple of weeks, whenever I got the opportunity at intensive language schools, the type of place where you go for a month and you're in classes for maybe 4 or 5 hours a day and only speak the target language, and then maybe you see something of the city in the afternoon. I did that in Rome a couple times, in Florence, Sorrento, even Taormina. And so I had a good command of the language. When I arrived in Calabria, I had already passed a B2 level, so upper intermediate in the framework of Italian studies. They have this in Europe, where A1, A2. You of course know that from Mondo Italiano.
Chills,
and
yes, I've
The
taken
Chills exam for citizenship, yes.
And I had already passed the B2 even before I went to Calabria. And then after that, I did C1 and C2.
Complimenti.
I wouldn't want to have to take the test today, but I had some good moments, and I guess in that 5 or 6 hour test that they get really long.
Very long, on average 6 hours once you get to the C2 level.
Yeah.
Indeed, it becomes more of a stamina to stay concentrated on the exam. So kudos to you.
the most difficult thing is waiting around until your turn comes for the oral part.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my language background.
Now you keep mentioning how you're getting kind of drawn to Calabria, like you're so you did a lot of studying in Rome, your family's in Rome, you're kind of bouncing back and forth, and you're being drawn to Calabria. What's drawing you down there?
I went to, it just was happenstance, actually, how I originally arrived. So it was just pure happenstance that I was looking for some way to remain in the country for a longer period of time, and I just happened to find a job in a small town in Calabria. And so that's how, and then after the 4 years there, that's how the book started, and then I started tours. But once you start focusing on one area, it then somehow becomes your mission. Mm-hmm. And that's what came in Calabria. And then it extended to Basilicata, because I looked around for another region that not much has been said about, except for, of course, Matera now, Basilicata. But, so that's how it came about.
Okay, so if I remember correctly, you start with Locri. That's where you were teaching. So that's kind of the opening, so to speak, of you have received this opportunity. And I don't know if naively you went or if you had done research. What were your expectations and what you found? And maybe if you can just share a little bit of what was your day-to-day life there, whether the initial adjustment, your teaching experience. And you spent 4 years there, is that correct?
2 years in Locri and 2 in Reggio.
Okay, so take us back to, you have arrived, first day, apartment, the school, people.
Well, I'm not sure if Viviana is asking me the mafia question here, if that's what I expected. That is what often people talk about when they talk about Calabria. People who haven't been there, people in northern Italy, that would be one of the first things that people would worry about. How could someone survive?
Very well in Calabria, I must say.
Okay, apparently not too bad.
We have the cleanest air in their region of all over Europe, so it must not be that bad.
In the Sila Mountains, they've done studies, and it's the clearest air, clearer than even in northern Europe. So when I arrived, actually, maybe one of the first things that I noticed was the buildings really weren't that old. Mm-hmm. And Locri was settled in around 800 BC. The Greeks settled that area. But, of course, those colonies fell, and, of course, Rome came, et cetera, people moved to the hills. And so a lot of the places that you see along the coastline have buildings really from the early 1900s. So that was probably the first thing that I noticed, because I really didn't think about architecture before I moved there. Mm-hmm. That you had to go to the hills and the older towns to see older buildings. Of course, there are still there are some places along the sea that do have older buildings, but Locri isn't one of them. And so that was probably the first thing that I noticed. But of course, you start eating the food, and Calabria is known for its quality of food all over Italy, and you start exploring, and you just can't believe the depth of history that there is in this area.
Indeed. So we're probably going to touch upon it. I can tell you when I took a road trip, and again, I was diligently and religiously following your book, which we want to make. We want to tell the listeners is not the guide. It's more than Karen takes along Calabria with her. So although we have never met in person, I guess I was feeling, now I can see my old pictures, I can picture you telling me, go there, that's the best viewpoint to take that picture, or you should be trying this. When I kind of crossed the border, when I entered Calabria, I was welcomed by all those stands of cipolle di Tropea, peperoncino, la bomba di Calabria, which is something that you will see throughout the region, even because la cipolle di Tropea onion, it's a very exquisite type of onion. It is very sweet, and actually the more you rinse it, the more it gets its sweetness. So it's one of those products that grow there, and obviously all those guirlands of peperoncini everywhere. But so after that, my first stop was actually in Rossano. So if someone were to go to Rossano, what would they experience, Karen?
Yes, the town of Rossano, which is in the northeast of Calabria. And Calabria is really quite a large region. And with the mountains down the middle, it makes it seem even bigger. And so Rossano is a very old town, and it was noted for its Byzantine history. Mm-hmm. So there is a particular manuscript that it's called the Rossano Gospel in English, that is from around 600, the year 600, and it's a beautiful illuminated manuscript with these images. It's really, as they say, unico nel mondo. Mm-hmm. It's just unique in the world that they have in this museum in Rossano. And there's also a licorice factory there.
Licorice lovers' paradise, Amarelli.
Yes, and you can learn all about licorice and how it comes from this root. And actually, the root is rather sweet. Mm-hmm. They even have licorice sticks that you can get, little pieces, and you can make a tea, a kind of an infusion, and you don't even need sugar. And so, and they also have this licorice that is very, very, very strong. So it's nothing like the Twizzlers. Mm-hmm. So if you go there and you see Twizzlers, mm-hmm. you'll be just completely shocked. Mm-hmm. It's the sort of pure, original licorice that they boil down these roots, and they get these little, you can call them candies, but mm-hmm. they're not sweet,
they have all different shapes.
All
and
different
the boxes.
kinds.
The boxes are also a collector's item. And as soon as you walk into the museum, there is this beautiful wedding gown that has been decorated with all different pieces of licorice. It still stands in my mind. You're probably, I'm a true liquorizia pura aficionado. So I spend a lot of time at the factory, the museum, and that you get to see the tour and you get to see the plant. And you're probably going to laugh, but as I said, it was a road trip. I started to recognize this plant on the side of the road, and at one point I had to stop. I started to pull out whether it was maybe licorice and sometimes weeds, and I would just chew on the root until finally I was able to identify 100% correctly the pianta di liquirizia. So after many tries.
Wow, that's not something I thought about doing.
So, Karen, let me ask you then. I'm kind of hearing this and I'm kind of thinking, okay, if I go to Calabria, what's that one thing I got to do when I'm there? What do I got to eat? Something that you see. When you're there, you got to do this. Well,
one thing is almost nearly impossible just to ask one thing. Because there really are a lot of things. So, as Viviana said, there's the licorice. There's another amazing agricultural product. It's the bergamot, the bergamotto. Listeners may have heard of the bergamot. You may know that it's in Earl Grey tea. It gives the flavor to Earl Grey tea.
It's the
oil that comes off the outside of the fruit. And the bergamot grows in the province of Reggio Calabria, and it's the best place in the entire world. And 90% of the bergamot oil in the world, it comes from the province of Reggio Calabria. So you may try, of course, there's bergamot tea. The Italians aren't big tea drinkers, but you might try bergamot ice cream, or you might try a liqueur of bergamot. So that's another product. There's also the cipolle di Tropea, the red onion of Tropea. And when people ask about one place that someone has to go, often Tropea is the first place that people would think, because it is a town on the Tyrrhenian Sea. It sits up on a hill, and it just has a spectacular view, white sand beach, emerald water. It's really just a beautiful spot. And this past year, it won the Borgo dei Borghi, the village of the villages, in the Italian club, the Borghi più belli d'Italia, the most beautiful villages of Italy. So Italians voted. Every year they vote and pick a different village, and this past year it was Tropea. So you can imagine that in a country that has so many beautiful places, this place in Calabria won this past year.
Wouldn't you say that the coastline, I personally enjoy the Calabria coastline, pardon to the listeners, more than the Amalfi Coast, because the Amalfi Coast, especially if you go there during summertime, it is indeed very touristy. There is one bus after the other, and you just can't stop. Before you know, you have traveled through all of it without having the ability to take a picture. And then, you go to Italy. The Nunzio also labeled the Calabria coastline as the most beautiful coastline in Italy. And you have not only Tropea, then you have many other places such as Pizzo, Capo,
Scilla,
Scilla e Cariddi, yes, mentioned both by Virgilio, and then in the Odissea. And actually, we do have an idiom. Maybe I should use that as the trivia, but unfortunately, I have chosen another one where where you say that you trying to incappa in Scilla volendo evitare Cariddi, which means you end up in Scilla trying to avoid the Cariddi, which means pretty much the equivalent of falling from the frying pan to the cadere dalla padella alla brace. So it's just to you avoid one big thing, and then you run in something bigger. But I wanted to to go back a little bit about the multitude of historical, how can I say, multitude of civilizations that have settled in Calabria, because we know it was part of Magna Grecia, and there, if you go to Bova, you're still going to see the street signs in Greek, and some other communities that you have, maybe more recent, from the 15th or 16th century, the Albanians. Can you tell us a little bit, can you give us a perspective of this multifaceted cultural presence in Calabria?
Right. So if someone is a history lover, Calabria is a wonderful place to be. As I mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, we talked about the Greeks that arrived, and there are numerous archaeological museums throughout the region, and the biggest is the one in Reggio Calabria, that is a world-class museum, and it has really a very wonderful collection, but the thing that it's known for the most are the Bronzi di Riace, which are these incredible Greek statues, two bronze statues from about 500 BC, 6 foot 6 inches tall, and they are just perfect. They're just amazing. And so someone, when you say what one could not miss when they go to Calabria, the Bronzi di Riace could be, for some people, that could be the thing not to miss. So there's so many things not to miss. And then there are Roman remains also, and many archaeological parks also with Roman remains. And then there, as Viviana says, there is this overlapping of different languages. For example, in the southern part of the region, the Greek language held a very, very long time. And there are still a handful of communities that still have an ancient Greek language as their, you would say, their dialect. And there are street signs in both a Greek language and in Italian. So Bova is the largest of these communities, and that is one of the communities that many people visit, and that is in the south of the region. Then in the north and then in the middle of the region, in mountainous areas, the Albanians came in around 500 years ago. So these are historic Albanian communities, and in these communities, they speak an Albanian language. And once again, you see the street signs in those languages, and on holidays, they will be dressing in traditional outfits that look more Albanian than they might Italian. So this is really very, very interesting.
Indeed.
All in one region. And then there is also one community that remains of a French speaking community. So, that is very interesting from the language perspective. So not only is the dialect different from Reggio Calabria to Catanzaro, for example, just the dialect that has more Latin roots, but there are these other languages and different forms of those languages in many, many different villages.
Wonderful. Karen, we're going to interrupt you for just 1 second for our little pubblicità, and then we will continue with this wonderful conversation. Applying for dual citizenship needs documents translated. Istituto Mondo Italiano provides certified translation and interpretation services in 20 different languages. Be sure to visit us at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org.
Don't delay in getting that plumbing repair done. Call Paolucci Plumbing today for all of your plumbing needs. From trenchless sewer repair and waterline repairs and replacement, hot water tanks, sewer camera inspections to Pittsburgh potty repairs. No job is too small for Paolucci Plumbing. Owners Amy and Nick Paolucci have been in business for over 20 years. So give them a call for your next plumbing repair replacement. That's Paolucci Plumbing, 412-782-5050. Again, that's 412-782-5050.
Okay, so welcome back, Karen. And you probably saw the attempt of making this traditional Alberici type of pasta, the stridelat, which is actually very complex because you start with just one piece of dough, and eventually it looks like a donut, and then you have to keep on working until the loop gets bigger and you pull it. But the challenge is that the noodles should never break, and then you continue this process until you reach the desired thinness, so to speak, instead of thickness, and then you pull all the noodles apart. So all that work to then pull them all apart. But it's indeed a very interesting, because it's not something that is part of the regular, so to speak, Italian pasta repertoire. So it was a nice challenge for me to pick up on. So the
funny thing, can I just interrupt? The funny thing about that is when I saw that video, one of the first things that came into my mind was that when someone does that video and someone will think, oh yeah, so that's Calabria and the people from the one area eat that type of pasta, et cetera, et cetera. But somebody from Reggio Calabria might be looking at that video for the first time and seeing that pasta for the first time when they saw your video.
Indeed, because it's probably very regional and specific where the settlements
areas, and vice versa. And sometimes they don't even know. I'll say something to someone in the south or the north, and they'll be really curious about it because they have never heard of it, and it's in the same region.
Indeed. Let's talk about some of the other activities, and I believe this also touches some of the experiences that you create for people coming and exploring Calabria with you. There are so many different things about Calabria that people might not expect. Can we elaborate on two unique towns? One is Seminara for the ceramics. These are not, so to speak, the Ruta ceramics that you would expect. Can you tell us a little bit about the ceramics in that specific town?
Yes. There are several towns in Calabria that have ceramic tradition that have continued, and Seminara is one of those. Seminara is in the south, so it's just north of Reggio Calabria, which is the largest city, and probably the pieces that make the most impression are the ones that are against the evil eye. Mm-hmm. The atropoic, I guess is the word, pieces that they're very colorful, and they put them on their houses against the evil eye. So there are these really
per scacciare il malocchio.
ugly...
Per scacciare il malocchio.
Yes, these really
Love their
sort of
curses
almost
in Italy.
crazy-looking faces that they still make, and you will see on someone's house or maybe on their porch. So that is one of the places that still makes ceramics, and apparently. One of the master ceramic makers in the beginning of the 1900s was in Paris, and apparently Picasso was enthralled with his imagination and the images that
they're quite
came out
unique.
of Calabria.
They're indeed quite unique. And so in addition to the ceramics, something that I personally didn't know is that in Calabria there is a revival of silk making, that Calabria was indeed a very important center for silk making. Have you seen any of that yourself?
Yes, they have it near Catanzaro. There, and also before Reggio also was a big center. But there are some young people that have started up to make the silk and spin the silk from the animals, from the worms, I guess you would say. And there's a woman who makes some beautiful work I believe it's in Cortale. And there's a little silk museum also. There is also an outstanding textile artist in San Giovanni in Fiore. And really, he world-class level textiles. And so that when you see his weavings, that can be from many materials, from wool to silk, and you think that it must have been printed on a material, but he is amazing. He can weave like a manuscript into silk, and it looks like a manuscript. But it's so there are many artisans.
And these are the experiences that would make me fly back in that region just for that, because they're so unique.
Well, good Lord willing, I'll be there in a few months. Karen, I want to kind of go back because I want to kind of tie this together. You talked about the different, the different cultures settled there over the years, and those remnants are still seen in some of the languages. How does that then kind of influence, the different culture? Like, you talk about the ceramics, you talk about the silk, you talk about the food. How does that play out? Are there traces back? Like, and for example, if I'm in an area that's primarily Albanian, and there's obviously, you're saying there's still, remnants of those settlers there, that culture is then there, or Greek culture. How does that play out? Like, what are they still, kind of individually unique, or is there some kind of blending that's just, you can only see this in Calabria?
Well, I think there are probably numerous places in South Italy. There are numerous places in South Italy with small towns like this. But, a couple, maybe 50 years ago, the people probably they did. They married more within their communities, and maybe from one Greek community to another Greek-speaking community, or Albanian-speaking to Albanian-speaking. But now, of course, with modern times, things are getting more diffused, as is the language. And so, unfortunately, in many of those small communities, they are losing people because naturally young people want to go to the big cities, and everyone speaks Italian. And with an Albanian language in Italy, they're not going to be able to get a job, in Milan. So everyone, of course, speaks Italian, and but it is the smaller towns, as in everywhere in Italy, are getting smaller and smaller. Mm-hmm. And so, like I say, you will hear, when you go to those towns, you will hear the people speaking to each other in those languages. But of course, with younger people, there are fewer that are speaking the language.
And indeed, the phenomenon of depopulation is something that I personally witness in those very same towns that we find so charming. There is a mix of also homes that are abandoned because people have immigrated either to other countries, whether it's US, Australia, or just went up north. In Pittsburgh, for instance, we have a huge community coming from Gizzeria, Maierato. We have Gamberale as well. And when I was in Maierato, I went on purpose because of my connections here with families from Pittsburgh. And I wanted to see this town that they talked with so much nostalgia. And as you walk into Maierato, there is this suitcase. It's a sculpture with all the different countries that people have gone to, and it's indeed a symbol for people that have left their country behind. And I was there in a very fantastic time of the year because there was the Festival della Trebbiatura, la Festa della Trebbiatura. And when you see these grain fields and the sunsets, it's like seeing a field of gold. They're so majestic. They're so picturesque, something really unique.
Yeah, so you're talking outside of Crotone, in that area.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Those fields are incredibly beautiful. One wouldn't think that they could be.
Mm-hmm. That could be the perfect setting for any movie, so to speak. The two books that we have available. The one on Calabria, the other Italy, and then Basilicata, Authentic Italy. Let me ask you something, because I feel, and I'm not a writer, that every book is like a child. And there is that pressure to produce then another book, and people maybe don't realize how demanding writing a book is. Did you feel that your experience was similar, or even choosing the materials, like making a movie? You have so many scenes, and then you say what goes in, what goes out. How was your book writing experience like?
Well, I would say it definitely was different from the first to the second, because from the first, it was my first time, the first book, and it also, and I never thought of myself as someone who would write books, and so it definitely grew out of my experience there, and there are a lot of stories in it. The people that I meet, it starts out when I arrive, and the experiences that I have in the market, and just in general, and then also it tells about the entire region, so that if someone wants to visit the places, as I visited the places, so my experience visiting those places. Whereas with the Basilicata book, I hadn't lived there, and so I wanted it to also be experiential. And so I had to go there and spend enough time to have enough to write about, to make it similar enough to the other book. And also, there's really a lot of research that went into both of the books, and sometimes I say it would have been just easier if I had written a 1,000-word book than to take out and boil it down just to the essentials, so that it would be an easy reading type of book. So, I feel as though it was a little bit different in that I had already done one, and the idea of how I was going to organize it, not having lived in Basilicata. Mm-hmm. And I also decided on the Basilicata book, I included two themes that I didn't really have time for in the Calabria book, because like I said, you don't want it to be too long. And so I addressed the briganti, the brigand theme, and also the emigration theme, and also the Albanians, because I didn't speak much about the Albanians in the Calabrian book, and they have them also in Basilicata. And so I said, well, that would be a good way of addressing those themes that I felt like I could have included in the Calabria book. But as I say, there's, you want it to be a reasonable length.
And indeed, also Carlo Levi, as you quoted on the first page of your Basilicata book, to me, Lucania, because that's also the name, just to inform people that's Lucano is the adjective that we use in our Lucania to refer to the territory. To me, Lucania is genuine, more so than anywhere else. One of the most authentic places in the world. Mm-hmm. So going back to the selection of the material, you have a wonderful blog. Can you tell us a little bit about what the readers can expect by going onto your website, which you can freely mention as well?
Okay. So my website is the name of my book. So it's www. and then CalabriaTheOtherItaly.com. Or I should say the name of my first book, because I never thought I would have a second book. And I have a blog, and there are about, I think, 135 blog posts. And I would say, how could I describe it? In a way, it's a serious blog in that I just don't say, I'm here, I'm smiling, and there's a nice picture behind me. The blog, I also do a lot of research, and I write about some of the places that are also addressed in my book. But at first, I started the blog with the idea that I would put in things that weren't in the book, that I would just keep continuing writing about Calabria and try to just keep going, But then I also included things in the book, but it's completely different from the book. So there are many, many photos and a lot of information. Just, for example, Reggio Calabria, the largest city. I have a blog post that sort of gives a little bit of the history and a lot about it. And then there are probably 10 links to other blogs that describe specific things, like one on the Bronzi di Riace, or on the Archaeological Museum, or there's a Bergamot Museum, for example, in Reggio Calabria. And there are other museums also. There's an art museum. There are actually two art museums, and there's a couple religious museums. So there's a lot of information on my blog and lots of photos. So if someone is interested in Calabria and they want some place to start, that could be a good place also.
Now, Karen, we've been talking about your books, but something else that's out there is the fact that you like to take people and do tours in Calabria. It's kind of your passion. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and talk about the trips and, what kind of makes them unique?
Okay. Yes. I then started to do tours because people ask me, it would be great if you did a tour, if we could get a kind of tour that included just sort of the culture of the entire region, which I'll tell you in 11 or 12 days, 10, 11 days is difficult to do because there is so much from the north to the south. So I started out with a program called the Calabria Cultural Tour, and that one. Well, you can look at my website. There's a page that has the tour, and it includes the Albanian one of the Albanian towns, Civita, and also Bova in the south, the Greek town. Lots about some of the archaeological museums. Of course, there's food and everything. We go to Rossano on that tour also. But then I decided another tour, and I called it the Traditions and Food of Calabria. And then some people said, "Oh no, the food! I want the food tour." But I say it's all the food tour. Everything's a food tour when you go to Calabria. We eat a lot of agriturismi, so what I guess you would translate as a farm holiday type places, where farm to table kind of restaurants, and the food is really excellent in the region. But what I try to do is give just in part an excellent overview of the whole region, both historically and culturally, and visually, and also detail about what we can say, some of the more important locations.
And also Calabria lends itself for many outdoor activities. I mean, Calabria is indeed one of the top destinations for Italians to go and spend their summer holidays. Can you tell us about, between the mountains and depending on the season of the year, what are some of the activities that people can enjoy in Calabria? Right.
Well, of course, as we said, the beaches, there's 500 miles of coastline. So you can just imagine. So there's everything from flatter beaches, which you find more of the flatter beaches on the east coast, on the Ionian Sea, to really dramatic coastline, more similar to the Amalfi type coastline. So you have your beaches. Viviana mentioned Gizzeria, which is known for its windsurfing. And so it's big on people who go in the water. I've never done it, but it's kind of exciting to watch. They even have world championships there. There's also a place, Elero, just south of Reggio, that has the kite surfing. And then they have mountains that run down the whole region. The Pollino in the north. Pollino Mountains are shared with Basilicata. It's the largest national park in the whole country. Then the Sila in the center of the country, and the Aspromonte in the south. And so, of course, you have hiking in the summer, and there's skiing in the winter. Actually, even in very south, even you can look right across and see the Strait of Messina, and really about a half hour, 45 minutes from Reggio, that's on the coast. You can ski. And so that is pretty amazing. And they're doing a lot of snowshoeing now in the Pollino Mountains.
There is a town that you mentioned in your book, but I've not been there. Morano Calabro. It looks like a nativity set in the winter, nativity scene. Can you describe it to us?
Yes, Morano Calabro is a beautiful little town that is in the northeast of the region. It's in the mountains, and it really does. It winds around the hill when you look at the town, and it really looks like in the winter like a nativity scene. The town was on a map even back in Roman times. There was one of those Roman posts. You know how they would go and they would mark the street from here to here is one distance, and there was actually one for right near that town. So it's been around for a long time. But Morano, I have a blog post on Morano Calabro.
I will have to go and
read
check
it and look at. There's lots of pictures.
Now, something that looks something else is, and sorry for our listeners, we're bouncing up and down, left and right, but there is so much.
Bottom line, go to Calabria.
Go to Calabria.
Just go to Calabria, you're going to be fine.
Well, actually,
there's a map in my book.
Indeed, and her map is fantastic because it has all the places she talks about. It's very easy to follow. My first experience of Calabria was actually on a Vespa sidecar. It's a custom-made sidecar that my brother has. And we did the Calabria coast to coast. I mean, Calabria coast to coast. How many kilometers that is? But anyway, our means of transportation was indeed, had limited capabilities. But because that took after a movie that was made, Basilicata Coast to Coast. So that was our first experience. And Pentidattilo, that is a name that has some Greek in there. What can people expect to see from this mountain?
Yes. In the south of the region, there's a town, this Pentidattilo, which stands for 5 fingers. And so when it was originally named, it looked like 5 fingers. And you can see it from quite a distance. It's in the Aspromonte Mountains in the south, and it's basically a ghost town. It was completely abandoned, although there are a handful of people now who have moved back, and actually the 1 or 2 permanent residents might even be, Northern Europeans. But
are these the dollar homes? Is that what these are? These little towns?
No,
okay.
No. I don't think they do the dollar homes there. Although that is interesting. A point about the dollar homes. The first place in Italy that brought up the dollar homes was in Badolato, Calabria, in as early as 1986, I believe. Mm-hmm. And they started the dollar home. And so there are various places that have it. And that community has really a lot of people have moved there, and starting with the dollar home, and they work well with the people who move in. They help them out. They just don't, let them sort of dollar home it on their own. And so it has really developed. But no, Pentedattolo, it's just really recently that there's a little film festival there in the summer. And it's just a beautiful, sort of eerie, also ghostly little town that is stuck up in the mountains. And there's a story about a murder, one baron and another baron. So it has sort of a ghostly history to go along with the ghost town label.
All right, Karen.
Also,
let's see, we're going to be wrapping up, but I got one more question I want to ask you, though, and I got a note because I'm going to be there in June, and I've got to ask the question because I'm going to be in Calabria. I'm going to be in a little town called Montericcio. What should I do when I'm around there?
In the province of?
Near Cosenza.
Near Cosenza.
Near Cosenza. Well, the old town of Cosenza is really, it's still an old town. And so you still see the old buildings. There is a nice little museum in Cosenza. There's 2 good little museums. There's one archaeological and an art museum in Cosenza. I would go to the Sila Mountains also in Cosenza, and it's not that far away. And there are these giant trees. There is an area of the forest. That's where they call it the Gran Bosco d'Italia, the Sila Mountains. It's known as Italy's Great Forest. And there are these trees that are called the Giants of Falistro, and they're centuries-old pine trees, and it's just a lovely walk that you can take in these pine trees.
Wonderful.
That was something I would definitely do if I was near there.
Karen, we haven't even talked about Sagra nor Pescestocco, but our Big Ben detto stop. Our clock is telling us that we have to say goodbye to you, and we hope to have you back. Maybe we'll focus more on Basilicata. But we wanted to thank you very much for all the useful information that you have provided to us. And again, please do not hesitate to contact Karen for your experience to Calabria with her, with the Calabria di Italy. Ciao, Karen. Buona serata. Grazie.
Thank you, Karen. And again, for our listeners, if you want to come on the show, you have a success story, or you want to support what we're doing here, please send us an email at theitalianradiohour@gmail.com. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Viviana, who is our guest next week?
Well, next week we have a little bit of a mystery. I mean, our guests are Justine Mestichelli and Joan Medeiros, the producer of the captivating documentary The Mona Lisa is Missing. You don't want to miss the learning about the painting being stolen and the actual interview with the daughter of the man who stole the Mona Lisa.
All right. Can't wait for it.
And as a reminder, for those of you who have missed today's episode, please visit us on our website, www.istitutomonditaliano.org, and you can click on the Italian Radio Hour tab. And vorrei ringraziare la nostra ospite Karen Haid, our sponsor Istituto Mondo Italiano, poi Luci Plumbing and Alaboara for the music. And finally, before we leave, here is our next trivia for the week. We had so much fun with my class last night trying to figure this one out. What does it mean when I say, Avere la botte piena e la moglie ubriaca. One more time. Avere la botte piena e la moglie ubriaca. Be the first to answer correctly by sending your answer to theitalianradiohour@gmail.com. Again, theitalianradiohour@gmail.com.
E vi ringraziamo per la risposta from last week. Again, we always love reading your emails. So, if you are not in the Pittsburgh area or might be traveling, remember you can catch us streaming live at khbradio.com every Thursday at 5 p.m. And be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour. Until next time, alla prossima.
Ciao, ciao.
Ci sta ceno garofula adorno e culirami con voglia la via.
The Italian Radio Hour has been sponsored by Istituto Mondo Italiano.